Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever stood at the base of a massive, towering skyscraper, you just inherently know it didn't magically appear out of thin air, right? And it definitely wasn't built on guesswork. It was constructed, piece by painstaking piece, on a rock-solid, highly calculated foundation. Well, the exact same rule applies to robust, bulletproof strategies. They are constructed, not guessed. So today, we're going to look at the foundational elements of exactly how we build these lasting strategic structures.
Okay, let's dive right into this. How do you actually build a strategy? I want you to step back for a second and imagine strategy not just as some vague business concept floating around a boardroom, but as a real physical structure. Picture the heavy steel beams, the poured concrete, the exact weight calculations needed to keep the whole thing from collapsing under pressure. Building a structure like this requires precise, deliberate instruments. I mean, you wouldn't use a hammer to cut glass, right? And you absolutely shouldn't use the wrong framework to make a critical, high-stakes decision.
Our source text for this explainer uses a very specific and honestly very powerful phrase to describe this whole concept. It calls this the architectures of strategic decision-making. I absolutely love that word, architectures. It perfectly anchors the builder metaphor we're going to be using for the rest of our time together. You see, when you're forming a strategy, you aren't just a manager or an analyst. You are an architect. And to be a master architect, you need to know exactly what is sitting inside your toolkit.
Which brings us to part one, the strategic architecture.
Before breaking ground, every master architect needs a comprehensive set of raw materials and blueprints. You have to know the lay of the land and what implements you actually have available to conquer it. So, let's open up the heavy toolbox to look at the exact decision tools outlined in our source material. This is the exact spot where high-level theory meets the actual dirt of the construction site.
And here is that master toolkit. Just take a look at this arsenal for a second. We've got marginal analysis, break-even, ratio analysis, operations research, linear programming, waiting line, game theory, simulation, decision trees, SWOT, Pareto, and feasibility studies. Now, if that list sounds less like a business strategy and way more like a syllabus for a terrifying graduate-level math class, trust me, you are completely normal. It's a massive amount of heavy machinery for one strategist to master all at once.
So let's move into part two, the core decision tools. Now, what's really interesting about this is that staring at a raw, unsorted list of tools like we just did can be totally paralyzing. So we're going to act like true architects and methodically organize this massive toolbox. By grouping these instruments into three specific buckets, analysis and ratios, operations and programming, and strategy and feasibility, we suddenly transform all that earlier chaos into pure logical order. We can literally see the anatomy of our strategic architecture coming together here. Let's break these columns down. Zooming in on the first group, we've got marginal analysis for weighing incremental costs and benefits, break-even for finding your baseline profit threshold, and ratio analysis for checking your foundational financial health. Think of these three tools as your poured concrete and steel rebar. These tools provide the hard, unforgiving financial numbers required before any structure can safely rise. If your break-even point is structurally unsound, well, whatever you build on top of it is eventually going to crumble. Let's move to and see how this builds into our second category. Here we have tools like operations research, linear programming, waiting line, game theory, simulation, and decision trees. If that first group was the concrete, this one represents the complex plumbing, the electrical grids, the elevators. They handle those crazy multivariable environments. They help you calculate optimal resource allocation with linear programming, anticipate aggressive competitor moves using game theory, and visually map out sprawling complex choices with decision trees. To really grasp how to deploy these effectively, consider the contrast between the static and the dynamic. On one side, we have the highly numbers-based nature of our analytical tools, looking at fixed points in time and fixed costs. But on the other side, we have dynamic process tools. Things like simulation and game theory are entirely interactive. They're forward-looking. They breathe and shift based on varying inputs and probabilities, allowing the master architect to literally test the building against high winds and earthquakes in a virtual space long before a single real brick is laid.
This takes us to part three, navigating the options. Okay, so we've poured the solid concrete foundation, and we've wired up the complex systems. Now we get to explore what happens when pure math meets high-level strategy in our final category, SWOT, Pareto, and feasibility studies. These conceptual tools act as your final blueprint checks. SWOT maps out the environmental strengths and threats, while Pareto reminds you that, more often than not, 20% of your building efforts provide 80% of the structural support.
These broad tools ensure the building is actually facing the right direction to catch the sun.
And this brilliantly illustrates the extreme juxtaposition within our master toolkit. It's fascinating. On one side, you have broad conceptual frameworks like SWOT and Pareto that require intuition and human perspective. But then on the other side, you have highly rigorous, tightly bound mathematical systems like linear programming that require absolute, unwavering precision. Yet, they all coexist. A true master strategist knows you absolutely need both, the visionary conceptual frameworks and the ruthless, process-driven math.
But I want to isolate this one specific phrase from the very end of our source list. Feasibility studies. Think of this as the ultimate capstone of the entire toolkit. You can have the most beautiful conceptual blueprints, you can have the absolute highest quality financial concrete, and you can have perfectly mapped operational decision trees. But the feasibility study, that's the final, ultimate test. It asks the hardest question of all. Can the strategic architecture we've designed actually withstand reality? Can this practically be built with the time and resources we actually have? It's the vital reality check that every great architect relies on before executing. So, the crucial point is this. Looking back at our complete arsenal, it no longer looks like a chaotic, overwhelming jumble of business jargon, does it? It's a complete, organized, and highly capable toolkit. As a focused learner, just remember that a successful strategy doesn't rely on pulling one of these tools out of a hat randomly. It relies on selecting the exact right combination of these varied instruments to fit the specific terrain and the specific structure you are trying to build. Which leaves us with one final, vital thought to ponder today. As you face your next major challenge, I want you to take a hard look at the blueprints right in front of you. Are you relying entirely too much on conceptual tools without doing the hard math? Or perhaps you're stuck in static analytics, completely failing to run dynamic simulations of what your competitors might actually do. Ask yourself right now, which decision tools will construct your architecture? Thank you for exploring this framework with me today in this explainer, and keep building.